We're from a little town called Leakesville down in southeast Mississippi. We both are from there. Our dads worked at the Ingalls shipyard for a long time, and we had the fortune of being able to be first generation college graduates, and the rest is history. But listen to all your stories. I don't know if I'm qualified to stand up and talk to y'all, but I'm going to give it my best. What I thought I would do is, after listening to y'all tell our story, how I came to be a writer, and the methods that I use, the schedule that I use, and how I come up with some of these ideas. Again, this is Cheryl. She and I, in 2009, I guess it was, I was newly elected member of the Mississippi Supreme Court. And so I had been a trial judge in Mississippi, a chancery court judge hearing family law cases, child custody cases, and those types of cases, dealing with estates and probate matters. Mississippi's court system is a little different than Alabama's, and so I was a trial judge. Before that, I served in the Mississippi legislature. There, I was in my second term as a member of the legislature when a judge in my area retired, and I was one of those old blue dog Democrats that don't exist anymore in this partisan world we live in. So I called a friend of mine from law school, who graduated with Cheryl actually, who was Haley Barber's chief of staff. And I said, Paul, I said, what are the chances of that Republican governor over there appointing a Democrat to be a judge? And I happened to be the chairman of the House Education Committee for Mississippi then. And so he and I kind of had some battles, but they were friendly battles, and the rest is history because he appointed me. And so I enjoyed my time on the bench. But when I got to the Supreme Court, Cheryl can tell you I'm kind of hyper. And when I'm at home, it's hard for me to watch television unless it's a football game. And I'm an Ole Miss guy, so I've experienced a lot of heartache watching the football game in my life. But I'm a little bit hyper. If a commercial comes on and was it DVR where you can pause it? Those are wonderful because I don't like commercials. And if a commercial comes on, I'll sometimes get up and go find something else to do and never come back to the television. And so I'm kind of a hyper person. And all I saw my parents do was work. They were both, Mom was from Mobile, Alabama, or was. She passed away in August of this year. My daddy passed away in 2004. He's from Leakesville, where we're from. And so all I knew growing up in that house was work. They worked hard, they treated people with respect, and they taught us to work hard and treat people with respect. And so I had something that my daddy didn't have, or my mama didn't have, and that was an opportunity through a Pell Grant program to get my college paid for. And so that's the big difference for me. And I went to Southern Miss. First I went to Jones, now Jones College. It was Jones Junior College when we both went there. They used to have a bus that left Leakesville and drove 60 miles to the junior college and ride the bus. And that's where it all started. And I got a transfer from there to Southern Miss. And before I left Jones, I was majoring in political science because I wanted to get into politics. And before I left Jones, my political science professor, a professor named George Pippin, he asked me what my plans were, and I told him, and I said, but I'm going to have to wait a while before I go to law school because I don't have any money. And law school Pell Grant gets you through an undergraduate, but I knew that I was going to have to work a while. And he said, look, he said, you might want to change your major. He said, because you're not going to get a job as a political science with a political science degree. He said, what are you good at? And I said, I'm pretty good at numbers. And then that led me to accounting, and I became an accounting major, and I graduated from Southern Miss as an accounting major, became a certified public accountant, did that for 7 years, and then I was able at 29 years old to go to Ole Miss to law school. And it was the best experience of my life. I loved it up there, and I was able to pursue that dream of mine to become a lawyer. Of course, every lawyer has a story about why he or she become a lawyer. And for me, it wasn't much different than many lawyers. It was a Saturday, and back where I grew up, we had television. You had an antenna on the outside, and you had to turn the antenna if you're going to watch the station out of Biloxi or Hattiesburg or Mobile. And so the antenna was on the back of the house, and we had this shotgun-style house and some one of us, my brother and I, would have to turn the antenna, the other was standing at the edge of the garden, and Daddy was at the TV telling us when to stop. And so that's kind of how we grew up. But one day I was a Saturday, and the Atlanta Braves was going to be on the game of the week for baseball, and I was going to watch that, and it got rained out, and they played an old black and white movie, To Kill a Mockingbird, and I loved Atticus Finch, and I didn't know how you became a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers. I had never spoken to a lawyer, but that's where the light was lit for me to want to pursue that degree, and so that's what happened. And so as far as writing, and that's why we're here tonight, when I got to the Supreme Court, I got there early. And not many people were there. In fact, I don't think anyone was there yet. So I got in there and got in my office, and people started trickling in about 8 a.m. and 8:30 and so forth. And so about 9 months into the job, what I would do is get there early and stay late. And so when I'd stay late, I'd review stuff, and I'd leave these sticky notes on my law clerk's desk and my judicial assistant's desk, Julia. And so one day, I'm in my office, and I hear a knock on the door, and I said, "Come in," and it was my whole staff. And you never want that. You never want your whole staff to want to meet with you. And I said, what's going on? They said, "Can we talk to you, Justice Pierce?" And I said, "Well, sure, of course. Sit down." And there's a young lady who we love named Tara, who was my law clerk at that time, one of them. She's like a daughter to us now. And she said, "Well, I'm the spokesperson." And she said, "Do you have a hobby?" And I said, "Well, not really." She said, "Do you hunt?" "Well, I used to, but you can't talk when you hunt. I like to talk. And I don't have the patience for hunting." "And what about fishing?" "No, same story." "Golf?" I said, "Golf takes too long. I can't spend a whole day out there golfing." And then I play on public courses, and there's always people up in front of me looking for their golf balls. I'm thinking, just leave it and move on, right? But it caused me, on a serious note, to reflect that I had become a workaholic. And it was unhealthy, because I was making other people unhealthy, because I was putting more work on the people around me. I was taking stuff away from them and preventing them from really growing. And so one morning, I got up my little laptop. It was in September of 2009, 9 years ago. And that little cursor was blinking, and I'm a word perfect guy. She can't stand word perfect.
Is it still even around?
Just the blue screen.
Oh, I still
You
use it.
still
You
have
talk
it?
my language.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still around, because I'm keeping it alive. And so that cursor was blinking in that left corner, and I thought, I know what Shift F7 does. It moves it to the middle. And I came up with a title, eventually, called Pain Unforgiven. And so I had planned, John Grisham was from Mississippi, graduated Ole Miss Law School. He was in the Mississippi legislature. He had a similar background that I have a similar background that he does. And I thought, man, it's got to be easy, right? I can write a story. And so, man, I put that cursor and I started writing. And of course, this is the paperback version of that first book. But I wrote the first paragraph. And that was all I did that day. And I went on to the work, and I was working and forgot about it. And that night, I come back and I thought, maybe I should write a second paragraph. And then it led to the third and the fourth, and eventually, months later, it turned into a novel. Yes.
Now, Justice Pierce, would you please read us the first paragraph?
Oh, now I hate to do this with these English teachers here. Before I read it, let me say this. When I finished this novel, I thought, it's the best novel ever, right? And so what I did, Writer's Digest. Anybody subscribe to Writer's Digest? You ought to if you're not. It's wonderful. It comes out bi-monthly. And a writer friend of mine named Alan Huffman, who would probably come visit y'all if he was invited. He's from Mississippi. Alan Huffman. He's written some wonderful books. One is Mississippi and Africa, about how the African Americans from Mississippi post-Civil War, and actually pre-Civil War, but settled Liberia, and there was a town called Mississippi in Africa. Fascinating work. So Alan Huffman, you email him, tell him I asked you to invite him.
Okay, I will.
But Alan, I had this manuscript, And a friend of mine, another law clerk, was renting a place from Alan and said, he said, look, I can get Alan Huffman to read it for you. And I said, I'm not sure I want that to happen yet. He said, well, somebody's got to eventually read it. And I said, okay. So we went out to Alan's, and Alan had, he went and disassembled. Somebody was going to tear down this old Civil War antebellum style home, and he and his friends disassembled it, labeled each board, and reassembled it on his land. It's a fascinating home. And so I get out there, and Alan goes back and forth between Mississippi and New York. And they also, he and his colleague, what they do for a living too, what their main job is they do opposition research for politicians. Alan and his colleague, they work mostly in the northern part of the United States. And the title of that book is called We're With Nobody. And they would go to the courthouse trying to research this guy named Randy Pierce running for office. Like when I ran for the Supreme Court, our friends in Leaksville, the circuit clerk, the chancellor clerk, they would call me, and my nickname's Bubba, by the way. They'd call me and say, Bubba, there's two guys from Ohio in here wanting your voting records, or wanting to look at your land, see what kind of, how many mortgages you got in your home. They were opposition researchers. That's what politicians do, to go try to dig up stuff, make sure I pay my taxes on time. And so Alan, when they would go out and talk to these people, they go, especially in the small town, they go, who are you with? I said, we're with nobody. And that's the name of his book. Back to the story. Alan very bluntly said, look, I don't know you. I know you're on the Supreme Court, but I'm not a lawyer. So the fact that you're on the Supreme Court means less to me than it would to a lawyer. And he was nice about it. He didn't say that bluntly. He said, but I don't read a lot of fiction. I write nonfiction. I love nonfiction. I read nonfiction. I just don't read fiction much. He said, but because Alex asked me to, I'm going to read your manuscript. And so I left it with him in a 3-ring binder, nervously drove away. That was a Thursday. On Saturday, I get an email from him with an attachment. And it started out, he said, Randy, I love the story. But having said that, please see it attached. And it was single-spaced. He had gone through the whole manuscript and just, tore it to pieces. Because to me, it was well written. But in reality, it was poorly written. And so what I did is I tried to fix it. I went to my retired English professors from Jones County Junior College through a friend. One of our teachers in Greene County's mother taught her at Jones, and her stepfather, who's married to Miss Neal, taught me. And so they were married in Laurel, Mississippi, and I said, would y'all edit my book? And so they did, and they helped me a lot. But there's a significant difference, as y'all know, between an English major edit and a book edit. And I learned that.
Yes.
But I remember after I finally got my last edits from Terry and Nelda Moore, as I'm going away, I said, oh, by the way, I want to put y'all in my acknowledgments. And they said, oh, please don't do that. that kind of worried me. They said, no, seriously, we do this. We just did this, but we don't want to be mentioned, okay? And so that should have been my first clue. But I self-published the book, 100,000 words. And it was overwritten, I recognize it. This book here has been re-edited by the publisher I have now, and it's now 78 or 79,000 words. He cut 21,000 words out of it. And that was difficult for me to do, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But the first paragraph was, Grant Hicks, and he left this one pretty much intact. Grant Hicks wrestled with indecision as he rounded the final turn of his morning run. After all, it had been nearly 20 years since he left that place, a place where people, though well-intentioned, often drew conclusions prematurely, a place where folks were quick to judge, a place where people sought understanding and forgiveness only when dreadful, abhorred circumstances happened to them. And that's where it began. That was the first paragraph I wrote with Grant Hicks. Now,
Yes.
and I set this book and the third book, The Peter Bay, in my hometown. Which, this is a teaching class, right? Be careful when you set fiction in your hometown. Now, I wouldn't set it anywhere else, and I don't regret that. But when you're in the Piggly Wiggly, and somebody comes up to you and say, were you talking about oh so-and-so? And I'll think, no, I really wasn't, but I didn't know he had those characteristics or whatever. But some people will try to see who you're writing about. But there was only one character who's long gone that is identifiable in there, and the first book. But that's what I did, and I self-published it. I went to the Writer's Digest conference in New York, and they have these. It's a wonderful conference. If you have an opportunity to go, we flew up, and she went to see Broadway plays, while I went to the Writer's Digest conferences. It used to be in January. They've moved it to August now, and we went twice, I believe. But the first time, at the conference they have pitch slams. It's like speed dating for those that know what that is. I didn't know what it was, but speed dating. And so I get the material, and I go, and they have wonderful speakers at this conference. But on Saturday of the conference, from like 1 to 4 or 1 to 3, they'll have 50 literary agents. Because ideally, if you're going to follow a script, you'd get you a literary agent. That agent would then negotiate and sell your manuscript, and then you become a best-selling author. So that's the road I was trying to follow. And so I get up there, and I met some wonderful people. In fact, I'm going to find his name. There's a fellow whose wife is on faculty at Auburn now that I'm talking, that I met up there. He and I are Facebook friends now. But and so what you do is you pick out and research which agent you want, and you get 90 seconds. I sit down in front of Diane and I start telling her about Pain Unforgiven. I give her my pitch slam, my elevator pitch, and then they ring a bell and it means me to hush. And then she has 90 seconds to give me feedback of the agent. And so I had researched this person from Memphis, and I thought, I'm going to just go up to the table and tell him I'm an Ole Miss graduate. He's from Memphis, and he's going to sign me as an author. And I sat down, and his first question, he didn't give me a chance to tell him my 90 seconds. He said, who can I compare you to? What author can I compare you to? And it threw me off because I didn't know. I said, to be honest with you, I don't know. I said, it's a cross between a commercial fiction work and literature. So he said, well, when you're ready to answer that question, come back or send me a query letter. And basically he said, move on. And that hurt my feelings. And I was pouting around there. She's watching La Caja Falls, I think, is where you were. I had nobody to pout to. So I saw an agent down there, but nobody wanted her. So I went down there and got in line, like the third person line. And I get up to her and I give her my 90 seconds, the bell rang. And she said, sounds great. Send me your first 50 pages. I thought, yeah. And then I went to the next one. And I was able only to see about 5 agents. And I got 3 out of the 5 requested part of the work. I sent the 50 pages or the 10 pages, whatever they requested, and didn't hear from 2. 6 months later, I finally heard from one saying, thanks, but no thanks. And so ultimately, I ended up self-publishing myself. I went to a law firm in Jackson, Mississippi, who has some lawyers that do this type of work. Went in, met with them, and I said, now look, I wish I'd brought a hard copy of Pain Unforgiven. I've got only 5 of those left at home. But I went to her and I said, look, I want to publish it. I'm going to publish this book. And I said, I want to self-publish it. And I want it to look like it belongs in Lemuria or Square Books. If it's next to John Grisham's book, I want it to look like it belongs there. And she said, okay. And they gave me the quote. And it was my Fred Sanford moment. Elizabeth, I'm coming to see you. I didn't know it was expensive. And so I talked to Cheryl about it, and she said, look, go for it, and we'll deal with it. And they said, you have to sell 2,500 of these things to break even. And I thought, I can sell 2,500 books. That sounds easy. It's not. But let me tell you what I did do. I started going to bookstores, and I got a couple good reviews in the paper. Being on the Supreme Court helped me. I was able to, I ran a campaign in 2008 in South Mississippi, and ironically, John Grisham donated to my opponent, but that's okay. But I had run for the Supreme Court, so I had relationships with reporters, and so I got some reviews that helped me. It was hard. I couldn't get in Barnes & Noble, couldn't get in Books A Million. They wouldn't want to deal with me. But after this Biloxi Sun Herald ran a good review, and that was really good, the Barnes & Noble store called and asked if I would be willing to put the book. I said, of course I sent it to y'all's purchasing department. They told me no months ago. And he said, just bring them to the store. And I had a book signing there. It went well. And I ended up selling all 2,500 or giving away. I sold about 2,000, probably gave 200 or 300 away to different people. But I never broke even. So whatever that they had underestimated the cost of trying to make that happen. And so what I did then, I kept writing because I enjoyed writing. You know, I just enjoyed it. I wanted it to be a part of my life. You couldn't write. Is that what you said earlier? You write?
You can't keep from writing.
Keep from writing. And so I told Cheryl, I said, you know, I'm just going to keep writing. And so this one, in Mississippi, we had a very negative campaign in 2004 between a state senator named Chris McDaniel and Senator Thad Cochran. Even before that, though, even though I was in politics, I hated partisan politics. I didn't belong. I didn't fit. I fit better in a nonpartisan judicial offices, which I went into because the Democrats were upset with me because that I wasn't liberal enough, and had I been a Republican, they'd have been upset with me because I wasn't conservative enough. So I just really didn't fit politically. I fit well in the judicial branch of government, so I kept writing. But this book, Magnolia Mud, is the second novel, and so I had written it. It's a fictional Mississippi governor's race, and all the stops that you make on a Mississippi governor's race is in this novel. And there's a lot of stories in this novel that I picked up during my time in the state legislature. And so I have a Democrat lieutenant governor running for governor of Mississippi against a Republican. And it's Magnolia Mud. Obviously, it has some dirty campaigning in it. But I wrote this book because I wanted the reader to recognize that there are things more important than winning the next election. And so I knew I couldn't afford to continue self-publishing. So I learned about his publisher, Dogwood Press, Joe Lee, and he'll come too, by the way, if you want to invite him. Joe Lee and Phil Jackson. He's got a writer named Valerie Wynn from Goshen, Mississippi, that wouldn't be hard for her to come over. She just released another book. And so Joe Lee at Dogwood Press, he's a one-man show. It's just him, but that's what he does full time. He writes himself. He's written he writes kind of mysteries, and he's got another writer named John Floyd that does a lot of short stories, and a couple other authors. I sent him my manuscript, and he picked it up, and he loved it, and we went on about the business of selling these books. Now, being a member of the Supreme Court, I didn't have the freedom that some people would have. I just couldn't go. You know, I had limited time that I could spend on a book tour, and I purposely stayed within Mississippi because I just didn't have the time. And I told Joe that. I said, Joe, if you're looking for somebody that's going to try to get this thing and go to outside Mississippi, I can't. I said, my time is just so limited. And he said, no. He said, if we can sell 2,000 novels, I'll be happy with that. And so we did. And then finally, the third one I wrote, Peter Bay, was released. It's my last one. It was released in 2016. It's hard to believe it's been 2 years. But this is a sequel of sorts to the first book. Grant Hicks is the main character here, from Leakesville, Mississippi, set in Leakesville, Mississippi. And so this story is more of a John Grisham legal thriller type book. So there are 3 little different books. Pain and Forgiven is kind of a family saga, a story of redemption and forgiveness. It's not a religious book, but it's got religious parallels. And Magnolia Mud is the governorship, and then finally the legal thriller. I do want to read something out of this book if I have time. When I was reading, the Peter Bay is set out really in the community. I called it the Big Creek community in the book, but it's really the Unity community of Greene County. And when I was, you get story ideas from different places. You got them from your career in education, and as a pilot, as a navigator, and so we all see things. And the doctor, you see things, and in your work as child protection, all of us. We experience life in different ways, and so there are storylines everywhere. Cheryl and I were in Jackson, Mississippi at a restaurant called the Old Tavern, eating lunch one day. And sitting behind me was a group of ladies. They were very boisterous. They were kind of loud. They were having a good time. We were sitting there eating, and so I started eavesdropping, doing some research. Because one of those ladies sounded like she'd make a good character in a book. She was funny. She had a big personality. And in my mind, I was trying to picture what she looked like based on what she sounded like. And I'll never forget, and I've written this down, I hadn't used it yet, so you're welcome to it. But I keep this legal pad where I hear little things and I write all these things that I want to bleed into a book one day. I wish I was more technologically savvy, I'd say it was on somewhere else, but it's a legal pad. And so the lady said, they were talking about a friend of theirs who was not there. And she said, that thing, she don't have any class. She said, she wore the same dress to both of my weddings. And I thought that was the funniest thing. And I said, I got to see this woman. So I eased over. It looked nothing like I had imagined. But I wrote that down. And my son Brantley teaches high school math in Biloxi. And and my daughter Tiffany, who's a nurse in Hattiesburg. Of course, Josh and Anna are still in high school. But we get stories from them. My son Brantley, he'll say, Dad, here's a good one. And he'll give me a story of what some of the kids will say, and he'll just tickle him to death. And so, but this one, when I grew up in the Unity community, it was out in the country, and my brother Terry was 2 years older than me, but he didn't like ball. I loved ball. I'd throw that ball up, hit it, and have these imaginary games. And so I wrote a scene in this book. Grant Hicks, the lawyer, comes home to Greene County and ends up defending this guy named Ben Petty that he met when they were like 9 years old. Ben was 9, Grant was 8. Grant was the son of a lawyer, and Ben happened to be in foster care with his grandparents for a brief time. And during that brief time, Grant Hicks met him. And then later in life, Grant Hicks, as an adult, had forgotten all about him until a local justice court judge that he knew, that you meet in the first book, come to him and said he wanted him to take this criminal case. And he said, "Are you crazy? I'm not taking the criminal case." And ultimately, he said, "You want to know who the defendant is?" And it was Ben Petty. So I wrote the very first paragraph here, talked about memories. And I love to listen to podcasts. I drive a little Prius all over the state of Mississippi. I'm the director of the Judicial College now at Ole Miss, and I teach at the law school. And I train all the judges in Mississippi, our court reporters, court clerks. I'm all over the state. And we just had an election in Mississippi, run officer next week, and we will have them in Jackson in 2 weeks.
Including the senator, Ms. Hyde.
Cindy and I got elected to the legislature at the same time. Of course, she'll be on the ballot with Mike Espy that same day. And of course, Mike was in Congress back when I was in the legislature right before Benny Thompson got elected. But yeah, they'll be on the same ballot. So I train judges, and I'm all over the place. Well, I listen to podcasts, and I listen to This American Life. And I was listening to an episode the other day about how we sometimes forget, these memories, and then something will jog that memory. And I thought about this paragraph I had written. It's not the prologue. I want to tell you about the prologue in just a minute. I think that's funny. This is the first paragraph in the Peter Bay. It was Saturday, March 1st, 2014. Memories often faded in hidden places too remote to discover without proper motivation. Sometimes a song will transport a person to a place or to a time long gone. Or an old friend would dislodge forgotten thoughts. For Grant Hicks, walking on the same soil he walked as a child provided fertile ground for visiting his past. After all, memories were never really forgotten. They just needed a little help from time to time. And so, on further in the writing is when he meets Ben Petty. And I won't read all of this, but he was out in the yard pretending to be Bucky Dent from the New York Yankees, when you had Thurman Munson, Reggie Jackson, Craig Nettles, and all those on the team. And so this is where I'll pick it up. It said, "Here it came, the ball. The bat connected with the ball on the sweet spot. The ball soared into the sky, and as Grant rounded first base, he watched it bounce into the woods. The crowd was on its feet as Randolph crossed home plate, then Nettles. Grant was running so fast that he almost caught Reggie Jackson as he rounded third. A voice from the woods screamed, 'Run, run!' Grant regained his composure. and sprinted toward home plate, sliding in safely. The Yankees win. Yankees win. Still reminiscing, Grant watched the skinny frame walking toward him. The youngster hunched over like he was carrying a 5-gallon bucket filled with water. His left arm appeared longer than his right. As he came into focus, Grant noticed his right arm was stuck in an awkward bent position. The boy stopped near second base on the pretend field. Grant walked over to him. "What's your name?" "Ben Petty." "Yours?" "Grant Hicks." He looked at his new acquaintance. "How old are you?" "They say I'm 9, Petty answered, "but I don't rightly know." Grant frowned. "Why don't you know?" "I just don't," he said. "How old are you?" "I'm 8 going on 9. "How do you know you're 8 going on 9? Grant shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know. Mom and Daddy told me, I guess." "Well, I ain't got no mom and daddy to tell me, so I don't rightly know." Petty looked toward the house. "You live here?" "Yeah," Grant said as he looked toward the house, then back toward the woods. "Where'd you come from?" "I was exploring, and I saw you play." "Do you want to play ball?" Grant asked. Petty looked at his right arm. "Can't. Arm's kind of messed up." He looked back at Grant. "Want to go exploring?" "I can't. Mama won't let me." He pointed at Petty's arm. "Why's your arm that way?" Petty held up his right limb. Grant grimaced as he took a good look. The arm was bent at the elbow and he couldn't fold it. Petty dropped his arm to his side and looked at Grant. "They say my daddy did this when he killed my mama." And that's how they met. And so later years, Grant, the lawyer, would reacquaint himself with Ben Petty. Ben Petty, of course, charged with the crime of capital murder. So it was fascinating, and the prologue is, what happens is the crime is the prologue was, and I will be careful. The prologue was the crime itself, where a young lady, a young mother, was abducted and kidnapped. And so that's what Ben was accused of doing. And so I needed to write the crime, and I'm a nice guy. I'm never going to kill anybody. I just couldn't do it. She sleeps a little later than me. So I thought, let me go in the bedroom. And she was sleeping so peacefully on that pillow. She's got one of these nice pillows. And she looked so happy. And then you know how when somebody wakes up, they kind of bat their eyes and they look? She opened her eyes. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to figure out how to kill you." And she said, "Get out of here," and rolled over. And I went out there, and then I wrote the prologue. I could go on and on. Let's ask some questions, Dan, because I don't want to take you too long, because I tend to be long-winded. So I would like to, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. I have written a 4th novel. I wrote it. I sent it to a friend of mine. I got a dear friend of mine that's he's got a PhD. He's a tenured faculty member, poetry professor at Florida State University named James Kimbrell. Call him Jimmy. He came from Leakesville, the smartest person we've ever met in our life. He's just fantastic. He's on the faculty at Florida State. He has the manuscript, called me, loved it, but it's not yet ready. I'm not ready to put it out there yet because I wrote that one unabashedly honest. And I love Larry Brown. I don't know who y'all like to read, but I love Larry Brown. But it's kind of gritty, and it's kind of gritty literature. But I wrote a book that if I wanted to write a Larry Brown novel, that's what it would be. And of course, sent it to Jimmy. He and Cheryl and Jimmy's wife are the only people that read it. And I told him, I said, "I'm not ready yet. I'm not retired yet." But there will be a day when I publish that book. And so now I put it aside and I'm working on a 5th novel, one that my mama would be proud of. And it's set in Leakesville. But I'll answer any questions that y'all have.
I really enjoyed your first chapter and your second one you read. I thought it was brilliant. Really drew me in. I wanted to know more about the story.
Very kind. There's things, if you ever listen to Thacker Mountain, I don't know if y'all get a chance, go to thackermountain.com. Oxford, Mississippi, and I just got to say, we're from Leakesville in the country, but there is It's almost like a mecca for writers. And at City Grocery on Thursday night, you've got Ace Atkins, Auburn football player who took over for Robert Parker and writes all those great mysteries. And he's there. One of my favorite newest authors is a guy named Michael Ferris Smith. If y'all haven't read Michael's work, you need to. He's fantastic. He's kind of a 2018-ish Larry Brown too. He has some good work. They all hang out there, and I just try to get a few crumbs here and there. But it's a fantastic place that people just show up because they want to come. Writers have come to Oxford, but it's a wonderful place. But it's fascinating to put pen to paper and let it go.
Do you think there's a story between Miss Hyde and Mr. Espy with the tenor that's going on in Washington playing out in the Senate race and how pivotal this race is to the whole count in the Senate and the things that are going on in Mississippi right now? Well, people never hear about it. Mm-hmm. The people outside of Mississippi don't know how that works.
Yeah, it's a unique dynamic. Mississippi, for the first time, at least post-Reconstruction, to my knowledge, has had 2 U.S. Senate seats up at the same time. Roger Wicker, the incumbent, was up for his regular 6-year election, and he was challenged by, and Roger's a friend of mine, and so is David Beria, the Democrat that ran against him. David Beria served in the House and Senate, or Senate and House, and he gave me a blurb on my book cover on Magnolia Mud, and so did Andy Taggart. I wanted a Republican and a Democrat. Andy Taggart is a friend of mine too, who was the chief of staff for Kirk Fordyce. But then the special election, Thad Cochran retired, and so Governor Bryan appointed Cindy Hyde-Smith to be the Republican senator. Senator Chris McDaniel, who challenged him in 2014, who is a Tea Party person, he jumped in that race, and then former Congressman Mike Espy, who's been practicing law with Morgan & Morgan recently and doing some lobbying work, he was in that race. So it became a 3-person race, and of course, Congressman Espy and Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith are in the runoff. So there's a story there, just like there is in the Doug Jones, Roy Moore situation. We were watching y'all too, as y'all watch us back a couple years ago. Has it been that long?
No.
Maybe it was a year ago.
It has been.
A year.
Yeah.
A year.
So that politics is fascinating, but we decided in 2019 we're going to try to watch less news and be less informed for our peace of mind. It's a difficult time we're living. Other questions?
Would you tell us again, I was so fascinated with what you were saying, I didn't write down, who was the publisher that finally helped you most?
Let me just tell you, I'm not, and you're recording this, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be careful. Don't show this to Joe when he comes. I love Joe Lee. Dogwood Press is my publisher. Pain and Forgiven was, when that first book that I self-published is my book. This is not my book. There's too much that was taken out, and I didn't know, and I went along with it. I said, Joe, if that's what you think we ought to do, he changed some stuff up, and this is not the original. There's too much. If you really want to read Pain Unforgiven, you get your hands on one of those hardcover. They're out of print. I've got. Like I said, we found 5 somewhere. Amazon. I bought them back from Amazon. Oh, by the way, I bought books back from Amazon, and I remember meeting a fellow from Oregon. It was either Oregon or Washington State, and we talked. And I gave him this sweet note, and then I ended up buying one of those Amazon books back, and there was the note. And obviously it wasn't as special to him as it was to me. But Dogwood Press has been very helpful for me.
And where is this?
Jackson, Mississippi. Joe Lee, he's fantastic. He'll come down and talk to y'all. And he is a good person. And he's a great editor, and he writes. But in today's writing, in today's world, it's different. You've got to have social media. You've got to have all that. Joe is a traditional print. He doesn't do much Facebook, a little bit, but not much. But you really have to. Like when I would go out to these book and sell books, Cheryl bought me a square, one of those square things from Swimpy Card, and so Joe didn't have that, and we introduced him to that. And so Joe's wonderful. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Stephen King, the way he presents himself and looks. But he's just a kind person, and he's helped me an awful lot. He's helped me make the transition from writing legal briefs to writing novels, and then the transition from the English editor to the book editor, so I would credit Joe. The only thing that he and I would disagree on is this version of Pain and Forgiven. It's still good, I think, but there's a lot of stuff. There's a conversation in there that I hate we took out, that I regret we took out. That Grant Hicks was struggling with coming back to the small rural town to speak at a eulogy for a man that was dying, an old friend of his. And there's a conversation in there between Grant and this old justice court judge trying to tell him what not to say in the church when he's eulogizing this person because he's gay. And Grant has a candid conversation with him about religion. And Joe took it out. And I regret not putting my foot down and said, no, that's got to stay. Because I didn't know, and I said, whatever you think, and he took it out. But that's my only regret. But everything else, Joe's done. The Magnolia Mud, Peter Bay, Joe's footprints are all over that. But they're mostly my stories. I learned to write better. And it just comes with time. Wouldn't you agree, Doctor? Writing, once you write a lot, those of you who write a lot,
It's easier.
it gets better.
You know, I'm so sorry that I've got to leave, but I've got to present 2 awards to 2 high school seniors.
Fantastic.
And I'm running a little bit behind, but I thoroughly enjoyed your
You're
presentation.
very kind.
I will follow up. I'll get your contact information. And thank you for coming and
Yes, sir.
speaking to us. It's been very
Yes,
inspirational.
it's good to meet you too.
Thank you so much. I'll be in touch.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sorry to leave everybody.
Other questions?
I have, as I said, I published a book, but I'm not happy because my daughter was my editor,
Uh-huh.
and she convinced me not to use the cartoon commentary that I wanted to put in the book, because I'm not an artist. Well, I have sold paintings, but I'm really not an artist.
That's right.
But for many of the situations throughout my book, I did these little stick figures, and I made a little situation that really emphasizes what the little anecdote says. And she convinced me that because I'm not an artist, because I'm not well known, blah, 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 that these little stick figures would not go in the book. So we published the book without them. And as the years have gone on, I'm like you with having left out the story between the judge and the young man. I regret not putting those in. I still have them. And I really would like to republish my book using those. How do I go about that?
Did you self-publish the book, or did you go with a publisher?
I don't know if it's called self-publishing or not. I went with a company called iUniverse.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with them. You have a contract with them,
Yes.
You look at it and see what it says regarding the rights to that work. And so you may have to get their permission, but it would depend on what the wording of that contract is.
Okay.
If it's just a platform by which you published it, that they don't have any ownership interest in it, then you should be fine.
I think that's the way it is.
Yeah, you should be fine. And but if you could go to, you could write dogwoodpress.com down, Kim, and go on under contact us, Joe Lee. He's such a giving person. I know he'd be able to answer that question for you.
Okay. In the republishing of your book, how expensive in comparison to the original publishing?
I don't know. The good thing about Joe is he bears all that cost. When I self-published, I pay for everything.
Right.
But because Joe's in the business of a publisher, I got a contract similar to you would get at a New York publisher in that I just get royalties. I didn't have to
Okay.
put any money out
Okay.
at all. But at the same time, he gets most of the,
Right.
as he should, and so, like when I self-published, I'd go out to the store and a bookstore, they'd keep 40%, I'd get 60%, of $24.95, whatever the price was. Now, I go out and do book sales or whatever, the money all goes to Joe, and I'll get, after I sold so many, it's a graduating thing, I'm up to where I now get 20% of what he gets. So, but he'll always get 80%, but that's not uncommon. But I just didn't want to, because I knew that for me to do 2,000 books, he has economies of scales. He's got relationships with entities that I didn't have. And so he gets it done a lot cheaper than I did. And so just be careful. If you start self-publishing, it can get expensive. And there are a lot of vanity publishers out there that are in it for the money.
Yeah, and
Just
like
be
you
careful.
said, you think, well, I can sell that many books, so my co-author and I
Yeah.
ended up with about 500 books we didn't sell. So now what we're doing, is we're giving our books to graduating people in education
Mhm.
at the college near us,
Yeah.
just to get rid of the books.
Yeah, book selling is difficult, isn't it? I have a friend of mine, a friend of ours that published a children's book, and she called me, and of course she calls me Bubba. She said, Bubba, she said, this is how much it cost me to print each one of those. I said, really? She said, yeah, and we're only selling them for $15, and I mean, she paid like $12 to get the book back, and she's selling it for $15. That's only a $3 margin. Well, if you sell it for $15, the bookstore is going to get 60% of $15. You're losing, $3 a book before you even travel to the store and have it. So, and she just got taken advantage of. I said, don't. She should have called me at the front side, because you have to be careful. And I had a friend of mine, a dear friend of ours. You remember Dennis Perkins?
Yes.
The Court Improvement Program in Mississippi. His wife got ill, and he loved his wife, strong Christian man, and so he quit his job, went home, and he said, I want to be by her side every day, and he retired, went home, and she ultimately passed away. And has written, or is in the process of writing, but has written a book about their story, and about his story and Deborah's story, and the journey of faith that he took to not knowing he didn't have the money, but ultimately how things worked out to where he was able to be with her, and then she recently passed away. So he called me. He said, I don't know any writers. He said, and he was telling me about some arrangements that the company he had found on the internet. I said, don't do that, Dennis. And don't do that. I said, we need to sit down, and I can tell you the bumps and bruises that I went through as a self-publisher, the mistakes I made. I can save you lots of money. And so we've been talking and helping him navigate it. But some stories you just want to print, right?
Right.
You just want to put it out. And for Pain Unforgiven, I don't regret losing money on that book, the original, because I love the story and I wanted it told. It's a pretty progressive story, and it especially for my little part of the world, and I wanted it told, and I told it. But I do regret cutting it down. I'm going to redo it one of these days.
Can you
And go
talk
back.
about that for a minute? Because I think some people don't realize that if you do have an editor, that you can stand your ground. So
You
you
can.
learned that along the way.
Yeah.
So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lawyer in Biloxi, Gulfport, named Michael Hughes. His brother's Billy Hughes. He's the mayor of Gulfport. Michael had called me, and he had this story that came to existence post-Katrina. He was, they were cleaning up their neighborhood, and he found some photos that were private from some folks. They didn't know them, but it floated up, and he found some husband and wife pictures, kind of like bourgeois. What is it called? Bourgeois?
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a little more than that, and so we found these photos. Oh my goodness! So these people probably didn't imagine those things ever floating out of their house, right? And so that gave him an idea to write this novel, and so he did. And so he called me, and I said, "What a story!" And so he said, "Yeah, we've never found the owners, but anyway."
The owners have never come
But he
forward.
went to Joe, and he and Joe had some creative differences. Joe wanted to take some out, and Michael said, not doing it. And Joe said, well, I wish you the best. And so they parted ways. And Michael ended up, I think Michael self-published that book, and he did like I did with Pain Unforgiven. He sold a good number. It did well in Mississippi. I think it was called Watermark. I think the book was called Watermark. Michael Hughes was the writer. Yes, sir.
With Dolby Publishing, did their contract cover film rights?
No. He basically, in there, we had a provision in there that if it's contacted by film, that we would negotiate together. So he did have some ownership interest, but not, he didn't own the movie rights exclusively. We shared those, okay? The interesting thing about that is, when Pain Unforgiven, the original, a friend of mine was working in Nashville, and he was a kid, but he had borrowed the book from his mom and was reading it. Another person read it, she loved it, and she was, a filmmaker. She calls me. She drives to Hasbury, Mississippi. We meet, and she wanted me to sign a contract for the movie rights to it. And I said, well, I got to read this, do a little research, and it was so onerous and one-sided. Basically, I was giving it away, just for the benefit, pleasure of seeing it, right? But no, and so I didn't sign it, and of course, it's never gone anywhere. But I did have another independent filmmaker contact me and drove to Leakesville and met with me, and he went out to try to direct. He was an independent filmmaker, and he was trying to raise the money to see if he could make Pain Unforgiven a movie, and I hear from him occasionally, but he's moved on to other projects. So
It's always interesting because you write the book and then the film is always there in the back of your mind.
yeah,
And then the screenwriters and how they'll change it.
yeah, it's definitely with Peter Bay and Magnolia Mud, the changes were there, but they weren't as significant, and didn't bother me as much. And then Joe, like for example, he used some words that I wouldn't use. Like my character wouldn't in the dialogue. I said my character wouldn't say that. He wouldn't say that.
That wasn't part of his personality.
And yeah, and
Well, he wouldn't say it that way.
yeah, and he said, so noted, change it back. So the dialogue, he gave me a lot more freedom in it, because I know the character I created, and I know the way he talks, or she talks. And so that was where he gave me more freedom, but and rightly so, when you're dealing with the backstory, you can get too wordy, you can explain too much,
Yeah.
and nobody wants to have somebody tell them what they're thinking, just show them through facial expressions and through dialogue. So he helped me in that big time. Yes, sir.
If I've got it straight then, as a self-publisher, you did all your own marketing.
Yes, sir.
You weren't in any way, was this out of necessity or financially, or was it just you decided to do it like John Grisham, put 100 books in your trunk and go out and to the grocery stores and here and there and try and sell them?
Yes, sir.
Right, I gather that. I mean,
I had another lawyer friend of mine that I went to law school with, that we went to law school with, that he had self-published a book, and I met with him, and I never forget, he told me, he said, look, you're not going to make any money doing this. He said, but don't make the same mistake I did and publish too many, because I've still got them in the garage, and my wife wonders when I'm going to get rid of these books, but I just can't, because they just didn't sell. He said, but for me, it was about putting a good quality product out there I wouldn't be ashamed of, and just seeing what happened. He said, and with the idea, this is going to be my loss leader, that I'm going to let it be. But then my second book will come along and I'll do better.
are you still selling?
Some, not a whole lot, because I just don't, I don't get out. Mississippi has a wonderful book festival. I go there. December 18th, I'm going to be at Lemuria in Jackson. So I do a little bit, but not a whole lot. Most of mine sell today on Amazon. I used to, when these first come out, I was going to Rotary clubs, bookstores, and wherever, friends of the library, and that's how I sold the books. But now I'm 2 years removed from the Peter Bay, and so I'm not doing a whole lot right now, but except writing.
But they're still selling on Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
recovered all your investment?
Oh, no.
So I was, I hated to say you haven't made
Have I?
any money.
Have a? No. She told me one year, she said,
Are
Randy,
you the
this
controller?
hobby of yours
All
is
the
getting expensive.
driving and stuff
Yeah, I mean, look,
overnight.
no, I'm an accountant, I'm a CPA, so when I figure profit and loss, I figure mileage, I do everything. So from that perspective, have I cash flowed? And yes, I've gotten more money back than I actually put into the books. But when you factor in mileage from to and from Gulf Shores, Alabama, or the hotel stay, or you know,
But you truly love to write.
I love it. It was worth it to me. Look, people spend money on bass boats, and motorcycles.
Golfing,
clubs.
just think if you were golfing.
Cigarettes and alcohol.
Yeah, this is it's been fun. Maggie Mud and Peter Bay hadn't spent a dime as far as out of pocket, so but it's been a learning process, and I love it. The story I'm creating right now is
Well,
gonna
I'm
be
sort of learning the hard way, but,
yeah, that's okay. We're all lifelong learners, aren't we?
Yes.
well, I'm old enough to know better probably, but
That's funny. Anything else? I know this young lady's got to be bored to death.
No.
Are you? Fantastic. What grade are you in?
Sir,
What grade are you in?
third.
Third grade. Fantastic.
She's writing already.
What grade? Where do you go to school?
Redwood Elementary.
And where is that? Is it here?
Tuscaloosa.
Tuscaloosa. I was in Tuscaloosa a couple of weeks ago. It didn't go so well. Alabama. Roll Tide. First down, Alabama. Roll Tide.
It's a
That's all you hear up there.
Yeah. I took her one time. She said, I can't go back. Anyway, but we're Ole Miss people. We take a lot of defeat in our life. Bill's character.
That's okay, we all suffer from Alabama. I'm an LSU fan.
That's it. That's
But you never lost the party, right?
it.
I never lost the party.
You haven't had fun till you've been to the Grove. It is fantastic.
Yep.
Kim, thank you for
Well,
inviting
thank you
me.
so much. Is that all the
Thank you.
questions?
Yeah.